shown by a recent survey completed by court patrons this past June. They were asked a number of questions, including whether the court staff was professional and courteous, whether the staff was knowledgeable and helpful, how long they waited to be helped, the total time it took for their business to be handled, how they felt about the time it took to handle their court business, and how they felt about the overall customer service at the court. And these questions were scored, 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. And on that scale, the average was 3.61, showing a high level of satisfaction with the court experience and staff members who assisted them. Among those who commented on their experience, one said, "Both people I've talked to, Crystal and Sandy, were very helpful and understanding. I'm happy they are here to stand by the law and still be compassionate." Another person praised the staff as being very polite. They made a bad experience in dealing with a ticket more enjoyable. Another person said, "My experience was very pleasant, especially since I was here paying a ticket." One person commented about a traffic clerk, saying, "She is an outstanding employee of Provo City and a credit to her profession. We are fortunate to have her as a member of the city staff." Staff member Tim was credited with being, in one customer's words, magnificent. An individual with a late fee said that the staff was very helpful and understanding. In the words of another very satisfied customer, staffers Jody, Crystal, and Tim were absolutely fantastic. I've had plenty of court dealings and never felt like I was treated better, nor have I ever had things done more efficiently. Staffer Sandy was described as being very helpful and understanding and good to work with in a very embarrassing situation for me. She explained the consequence of my actions and protected the system of justice, but was kind and polite to me. Finally, Staffer Yolanda was described as very helpful and answered my questions and did all she could to resolve the situation concerning a court date. We are very happy with our new location. We are located at 75 East, 1700 South in East Bay, where we have been since late March of this year. It is a beautiful, comfortable facility with plenty of natural light, pleasant workspaces, larger courtrooms than we have previously had, and expanded areas for the advisement of rights to the defendants and for attorneys to meet with their clients. Thanks are due particularly to John Borg, Dick Blackham, Abe Duarte, our court administrator, Rhiannon, the administration, the council, and all others who facilitated the search for space, the leasing of the property, the approval and supervision of the construction, and all other work to get the new space in working order and open for business. I think most of you have had the chance to tour our court space, our court building, and we welcome you and all members of the public at any time during our operating hours to come and observe the proceedings. This is your court. We are proud of the mental health court program, which has been ongoing since our court opened in 2007. It has been effective in reducing recidivism. Utah Chief Justice Matthew Durant is recently quoted as saying, "We know so much more today than we did 40 years ago about what works to reduce recidivism. Programs like drug and mental health courts, for example, have transformed the way we hold offenders accountable and reduce repeat crimes. We must examine these and other evidence-based programs and practices as we build a more effective and efficient sentencing and correction system within the state." A recently completed study at Utah State University shows that graduates of mental health court are less likely to return to jail, and if they do, they rarely return as quickly as those who did not go through the program. We are proud to have a dedicated domestic violence calendar as well, which helps facilitate resolution of those cases, bringing defendants, their attorneys, prosecutors, victim advocates, and service providers together on a specific calendar day each week. We continue our collaboration between our Justice Court and BYU and Utah Valley University. Law students and college students have served as interns and externs in our court, earning law school and college credit for their work in assisting defendants in being advised of their constitutional rights, making sure that defendants make contact with their attorneys, that the flow of cases is as smooth as possible in the courtroom, and in the case of law students, researching legal issues pertinent to the court. The mediation program also continues with college and law students who assist parties in small claims cases in mediating those cases, which provides experience to the students and the litigants, a lot of valuable experience to the students and litigants alike. Many of those mediated cases resolve without trial, which creates a win-win situation for the parties involved. We are moving forward toward implementation of a judicial workspace program, a part of the statewide court computer system technology that's in place now in our court. As part of this program, we have been given 6 scanners by the Administrative Office of the Courts to assist clerks in scanning documents, and we have a budgetary need for perhaps as many as 3 or more other scanners in the near future. I continue to serve as a member of the Justice Court Education Committee, responsible with other members of the committee for planning our 30 hours of judicial education, which we're required to take each year. I was appointed as chair of the Language Access Committee of the State Administrative Office of the Courts, which committee meets bi-monthly and handles issues involving court administrators, court interpreters rather, and court interpretation in courts statewide. I serve as one of 6 members of the Trust and Confidence Committee of the Justice Court, which is tasked with improving public awareness of justice courts and what they do in meeting the obligation to improve the quality of life in our communities. I was most fortunate to be awarded the Quality of Justice Award for 2013 by the Chief Justice of Utah last September. Thank you very much for the support of the administration, the council for our justice court. Are there any questions that I could answer for you?
Mayor Curtis. I can't imagine anything I could add to that to validate what they're doing over there, but I would like to add my personal appreciation for the great work that Rhiannon and the judge and their whole team and John are doing over there. It's amazing if you think about the potential, if things don't go well over there, for negative impact on the city, and yet I don't hear anything but good with all that potential for bad. So thank you so much for running just a great court and doing such a great job.
Mr. Winterton.
Refresh my memory. Is it 5 years on that lease that we have there at that?
5 years is how I understand it.
That's okay. Very good. And I'm amazed that you can use the word satisfied customers. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, we don't want that to be, I think the word is oxymoronic. So we are appreciative that those surveys have been as favorable as they have been.
Judge Romney, may I personally commend you for establishing a high standard for an annual report. This was a superb report, and thank you very much for the prefacing history lesson. Much appreciated. I invite Mr. Borgett, should he wish to make some additional comments, and Ms. Newton as well.
Well, I don't want to take anything away from what the judge has said, but I would just support and just go along and just say that both Rhiannon and the judge are doing such a fantastic job, and we are so fortunate to have such a great staff. We don't have any staff members over there they're all just fantastic. Most of them have been there for quite a long period of time, and the court is just being run very well, and we're just really excited about our justice court team. They do fantastic.
Thank you. Ms. Newton? Thank you. Well, superbly done. Thank you for your high standard of performance and extraordinary service to our community. Thank you very much. Join me, please. Mr. David Day is with us to take up a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and we then turn to a public hearing on an ordinance approving a 13-lot subdivision to be called Foothill Park, Plat C, vacating lots 21 and 26 through 36 from Plat B, including the vacation of 1540 East and the portion of Summit Drive north of Ridge Drive, generally located at 1440 East Ridge Drive in the R110, that is one family residential zone. Mr. Day.
Yes, I'm David Day with Public Works, and I'm going to try to explain to you what we're doing here. And I've been told in my life that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to probably present about 6,000 words here for you. So if you could go to that PowerPoint, please. Okay. So if you look at the screen up here, you can see that is Foothill Park Plat B as it was recorded originally. You can see the whole boundary there with all of the lots included and all the roads that are shown there. The section that is just highlighted right there is the section that's in question, just so you can kind of remember where we're at there. The section in red is the proposed Plat C, and then the reconfiguration of the roads like that, with a cul-de-sac and a road that goes, the road that goes up higher. Well, the road that's on the top there is the road that goes up to the new park that'll be built eventually, the Foothill Park. So, and then this one shows, this picture shows the road that was part of Plat B as it cuts through the new Plat C. And so the gray area is the area that we're actually vacating to make it so that we can record Plat C. And then you can see the remaining Plat B is left untouched, as well as Seven Peaks Boulevard. And then this will be what eventually becomes known as Foothill Park Plat B and Plat C in the darker area up above. Well, I hope that makes sense. Any questions about that?
Mr. Winterton, please.
Yeah, Dave, help me. How many lots can we put on a cul-de-sac, as far as
About
having not having two access?
For a single point of access, about 14.
We're allowed. That's the code says 14 on a
Yes.
single point of access.
Yeah.
And this, how many we got there?
Yeah, we've looked at that, and it doesn't exceed that. To the east there's no lots. That kind of borders a steep hillside. And so what you see there are the lots that'll be on that cul-de-sac right there.
So there won't be any more going to the east. It's just too steep.
Yeah.
Mr. Hales?
I was curious about the little spot along the road there below Lot 301. What is that? And what would that become? Is that just part of the hillside? Or?
So just to the very east there and down towards the south?
Yes.
Okay. So there's that little sliver there. That borders the big detention basin that's up there, debris basin. It's quite large right there. And that portion of property will be deeded to the city. So there won't be any nuisance strip there.
Other questions of Mr. Day? Yes, Ms. Santiago.
So the lot on, 306 would exit onto Seven Peaks Boulevard and 309? And then the other lots that are around the cul-de-sac would, their driveways would exit into the cul-de-sac?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the road, as it goes south, that's to the park? That one's to the park? I didn't see where you...
Yeah. If you look the furthest to the right, that road that's
By
kind of
303?
just dead ends, that's the road that goes to the park. That's going up pretty steep grade up to the park right there.
Okay. And 301 and 302 are large because they're undevelopable, or are they just, are they hilly?
That was part of the property that was originally part of well, prior to subdividing, it was just part of the parcel of property that they owned. The lower part that connects to the road right there is developable. The other part, it goes up a real steep hill. It's just got included in the lot. It's not really usable, but it's part of those lots.
So in the Planning Commission report, they talked about a problem with was it too many entries onto Seven Peaks Boulevard? I'm not clear on what their concern was. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. On collector roads, we discourage driveway access. We're trying to make it so that our collector roads are accessed by other city roads. It makes for better capacity, less people trying to pull out of their home into a busy road, kind of like some of the other roads we have in the city where there's heavy traffic volumes, but single-family residential homes built on those roads, and they have a hard time accessing in and out without waiting a long time for traffic.
Do you foresee this being a busy road, that Seven Peaks Boulevard?
Not really, but it is classified as a collector, so we maintain those standards on it.
Okay. So it was the conditions of approval from the Planning Commission state staff is to follow through with the investigation into the Seven Peaks Boulevard encroachment north or the roadway and find a resolution.
Yeah, we had an inquiry by Jeff Burton, who lives to the west, and they have cut part of his property out. We're working on a resolution to that, though, to try to make it so that Jeff Burton is satisfied with the solution there. But none of the Seven Peaks Boulevard is included in this plat revision, so we don't really have any ability to address that with this.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Mr. Van Buren.
Could you help me understand also, Seven Peaks Boulevard, between it and Lot 302, there's property that's not part of this. What property is that, and how will that play into
that's also a steep property that if I recollect correctly, is owned by, I think, Steve Groh, and he owns a bunch more going way up onto up by the Y trailhead, all the way up through there. So
that piece wouldn't be developable?
I think that particular piece right there is too steep. It exceeds the 30% slope that our ordinance requires it to be under the 30% to be able to develop on. It's way in excess of that. It's probably 50%.
You would not need access to that new road then, facing the road like Lot 302?
There's actually a little dirt road that comes down that will tie in to Seven Peaks Boulevard eventually when that's built.
The other way.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Will that eventually connect to 1450? Is that the one, the Seven Peaks Boulevard
Yes.
eventually comes up and connects to
Seven
1450?
Peaks Boulevard comes up and it goes along the bench there and connects right at 1450 where Oak Cliff comes down, and intersects right there.
Okay.
That's about 3,000 feet north of what you see here.
Thank you, Mr. Day.
Okay.
I invite any who came to speak to this issue to approach the podium and do so, please. Is there any further commentary, or are there any further questions? I invite a motion then to approve this ordinance.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. A second? Thank you, Mr. Van Buren. All in favor of the motion? Thank you. That vote is unanimous in the affirmative. Now to Mr. Matt Taylor, a public hearing on an ordinance amending section 15.04.030 minimum acreage requirements of the Provo City Code to reduce or eliminate the minimum acreage requirement for a subdivision, which currently may not be less than 3 acres unless the Planning Commission determines the area is an infill area and cannot reasonably be combined with adjacent properties.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the public's sake, this item was discussed close to 90 minutes worth of discussion in the work session. I will not repeat that. However, if you're interested, that is available online. You can obtain the video through our blog, provocitycouncil.blogspot.com. It will also be posted to our YouTube channel, which is a link is available through the provo.org website. I have no further additions to what was presented, other than, again, this was a response to a planning, to an applicant request to amend the provision. Planning Division recommend an alternative version, which the Planning Commission forward for your review. What we put before you tonight is an amended version, which addresses some concerns that already articulated between Brian Jones and myself, if the council chooses to move forward with this amendment. Mr. Jones has made a few edits this morning that was advanced to us, and we put them before you right now. However, we didn't give you a strike and bold version, so he's going to go over the various changes.
Good.
I can go over them in detail if you'd like, but I would just mention that none of the changes that I made this morning are in the substantive portion of the ordinance. So what's in the copy that you have in front of you, the second page where it actually amends the ordinance, I didn't make any changes there. I just made some changes in the whereas clauses to document the history of the fact that what you've got in front of you is not what the Planning Commission recommended. The way the previous version read, it sounded almost like this was what the Planning Commission had forwarded. So I just added a paragraph that explained that the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation and then council staff edited it. But that's just in the whereas preamble portion. So.
That's the immediately preceding paragraph.
Right. So the paragraph at lines 33 to 35 is all new. And I added some language at 30 and 31 regarding what the Planning Commission had originally recommended.
I invite any who came to speak to this issue to approach the podium, and please do so.
My name is Nathan Chappell, the applicant. And in the past, the amendment we've already talked about, the 3-acre minimum, as it exists, tends to it takes away a lot of property rights by the people who own it. We are now down there in an A15 zone, which we cannot comply with because surrounding subdivisions has come in and choked it down to where we're only an acre or less in some cases down there. And so by keeping that at 3-acre minimum, there's a lot of ambiguity being brought there. I've gone to the city planning, 3 neighborhood meetings, UDOT, I think it's 3 or 4 city, neighborhood meetings. I've changed the plans around. And the ambiguity here is that what is infill? Nobody will really consider what is infill. And the way they're changing the wording now, it would have made Whisperwood to the east and I think Reese Estates to the north considered everybody there to where they may have stubbed in for us or did something there. But the way it was, they had 3 acres. We didn't have to consider anybody within the surrounding area. And so the wording that I got with the new one, I think would eliminate a lot of those problems.
Are there questions of Mr. Chappell? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
can I make one additional comment? There was one question that that Matt and I had not resolved earlier. If you look at line 63, there was a little bit of a miscommunication here where I had put in an option and it wasn't clear that it was an option. So having clarified how the process actually works, I would strike the words independently and /or at the beginning of that line. Without going into too much detail, I was unsure of the process for smaller lots and whether or not there was 2 steps to the application. But having confirmed with Matt that there's only one, I would just strike those words to make it clear that when it's a smaller subdivision, the documents only have to be submitted with the final plan application.
That is, the conceptual street layout plan shall be submitted with the application for final plan approval.
Correct. That's how it should read.
Questions or comments? Members of the council? Ms. Santiago?
So I guess it's a question for Mr. Chappell. You mentioned that the wording in this resolution would correct the problem for you. As far as, could you just explain that a little bit? Maybe what your plan is, to move forward, and how this helps correct that plan, or what your future plans would be.
How it helps correct it is if too many people are saying, okay, minimum 3 acres. They live by the letter of the law. And like Matt said last meeting, you have a lot of subdivisions smaller than 3 acres have been approved. And the reason that we haven't got through with this after 6 years is because the literal interpretation of 3 acre minimum, rather than somebody saying, okay, it is considered infill, and here's why it's considered infill. And with the new wording, you can look at it and not have to be so literal on the 3 acre minimum.
In work session, and I don't think you were able to attend, but there was discussion about the fact that you could go to the Board of Adjustments to have them review your proposal, and just wondered what your thought was. Did you know about that, and did you decide not to do that? Or you've been there 3 times? Okay.
7 years.
You've been there 3 times over the same proposal?
Mm-hmm. Well, I changed things around. I've made bigger lots. I've changed things around. I tried to placate neighborhood people, which, a lot of times is not possible. I've been to the Board of Adjustments. It didn't work because too much literally trying to say 3 acres, and that's where they're sticking with. Even though you can't really, conceivably join it with another property, that seems to be a stigma.
And it was also mentioned that one of the biggest roadblocks, or a significant roadblock to developing this piece of property, is where you decided to build your home. And could you explain your thought process there? What your plan was in building your home where you did?
Well, there was an existing home there. We tore it down, but we put a new one in its place.
Okay, that was the rationale for building there. Was it the utilities were stubbed there, or the?
Yeah, everything was stubbed there.
So that was the rationale for it.
There was a home sitting exactly where I put the new one.
Okay, because they talked about trying to create a road that would serve a development there, serve a cul-de-sac, and it's difficult to fit a road there with the home that has the addition just to the, I believe it's just to the north of you that has an addition, and then with the way your home is situated, that it would be hard to get a road that's wide enough for that.
It would have been hard to have done that anyway. So had we torn the house down and saved the place, it wouldn't have made any difference.
Okay.
You take the road through there, and then where do? You take out a whole bunch of the property to the north. just didn't fit in. I worked it out how, with UDOT, how you can improve the other lots. Do you have that plat, Matt?
Not up at the moment, but I did review it earlier. I can bring it up
So that's
if you
okay.
wish.
We got it worked out with UDOT how to improve the properties to the north without any problem at all. I think I have a copy of it here if you want.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
You want to look at it?
Yeah. Yes, please.
I think I left it back here.
This is what was shown. Okay, so this was shown to us in work session. And Gary, maybe you can help clarify, is this cul-de-sac feasible with this plan that was shown in work session?
I don't have that in front of me. Can I see that?
Sorry, I don't know if you wanted to see that.
Yeah, this cul-de-sac that shows the lots, it meets the standards of an R18 subdivision, and that's what he needs to do, is get a rezone to the R18 subdivision. The reason he can't do that right now is it's in the agricultural zone, I think half-acre lots. And so or 5-acre lots. So it's a non-conforming parcel, and but as an R18 subdivision, yeah, it meets the requirements of an R18 subdivision and would work.
Okay. So in your opinion, do you feel that the 3-acre minimum answers his concern for being able to develop this? Do you feel like this changing the ordinance, besides the need for a rezone, do you think that changing this ordinance is going to address those concerns that he has about developing there?
Well, the new ordinance that takes out the requirement for the 3 acres will now, well, previously when there was the 3-acre requirement, it was presumed if it's 3 acres, you just go forward with your, 3 acres or larger, you just go forward with your subdivision. If it were smaller than 3 acres, you couldn't go forward with your subdivision unless it was deemed infill. And the applicant had been several times to Planning Commission, and every time they'd said, no, we don't think this is infill, and that there's ways to develop it. And so now, without the 3-acre requirement, the applicant, there is, and having said that, most cities that I know of don't have such a requirement. The top of my head, I don't know of any other city that has that 3-acre requirement like Provo does. And so now that would be gone, he'd just go through if he gets the rezone, then he would go through the normal process and we would work through it.
And in work session, you mentioned that he could go to the Board of Adjustments and...
Yes, if he makes an application for something, he can go to the Board of Adjustment if on an administrative item, which the application for a subdivision would be, and you go to the Board of Adjustment, and if you don't like the decision from the Board of Adjustment, then you go to District Court. And that's that appeal process for subdivisions.
Okay.
As it stands, they're not required to consider people here, and here.
He's pointing on the plat to, looks like Reese Estates, saying they're not required to consider people, but Reese Estates is already built, and so whether they consider it and under what circumstances and things that transpired at that time, I don't know. I don't know if they came to property owners at the time, and that happens occasionally. A property owner comes in and says, no, I'm happy with my zoning. I want to farm this or whatever it is that they want to do for the rest of my life. And then kids and circumstances and things change over time, and then they decide to do things. And that's one of, as we talked, that's one of the burdens of going last in a development is often you're stuck to the development pattern that's around you.
Thank you.
One more comment. To continue with agriculture, you got to have water. There's no way now that the development has gone around to get water there. So to use it as agriculture is not even feasible.
Thank you, Mr. Chappell. Are there other comments before we move to a motion?
I guess I should say, oh yeah, thank you. I do have concerns, like I mentioned in work session, about changing a citywide ordinance for one situation. As we talked to planning staff, they mentioned that this has not been an issue for the city. So I do have concerns about that. And then there's one clarification that I need to make, or need to have somebody make, about the 3-acre minimum. It was hopeful. I'm hoping, Mr. McGinn, maybe you can clarify this. It was mentioned that the qualification, I don't know, somehow it just seemed like first we said that if it was at 3 acres, there was a certain requirement, and then it just got very muddled. I don't know how important that 3-acre requirement is for what Mr. Taylor said about, gumming up future plans if you have a lot of small developments that are, put in together, put one at a time, small parcels. So I don't know if you even understand my question. I'm just a little unclear about what the 3-acre requirement does for us. It seems like it was a bit of a safeguard in the past from having small developments doing just that. And with this new resolution, the way it's written, how will that affect those types of developments?
Okay. That's actually a really good question. When you go into an area and develop, what you'd like to see is, frankly, the larger the parcels of property, the more cohesive and integrated the development will be in the area. So as a city planners, we like to look for large pieces of property together. And this is a great example of one where you have a property owner here who's owned it for quite a while, and Reese Estates came in. The best thing for all parties involved from our perspective would have been, way back when Reese Estates was coming in, this property would be a part of that and come in all together. But if people don't want to do that, you can't make them aggregate the property and come forward. So some communities do have, in certain types of zones, minimum lot size, or not necessarily lot size, but you have to aggregate minimum amounts of property to be able to do some things. In our city, what we have is an ordinance that says, okay, if it's over 3 acres, it's just a subdivision. You don't even need to think about it and go forward. If it's under 3 acres, unless it's infill, and an easy example of that would be you have a project that completely horseshoes around a separate piece of property, and that piece of property is 2.5 acres. They don't want to be involved in for whatever reason, they don't want to be involved in the larger development, or they weren't asked, or whatever the reasons are. So you have this horseshoe project around a piece of property, and there's literally one owner. It's 2.5 acres. There's no place for them to go, no place for them to develop, and so it's clearly an infill development, and you work with them, and that's regardless of whether streets are stubbed in or not. That's what you do, is they go forward. Now, you may have a large development here, and it butts someone who has a piece of property that's 2.5 acres, but it only abuts it on two sides. And so let's say to the north side, there's all this undeveloped property. And that 2.5 acres along with that other 10 acres could develop as one large project. Well, we would say at 2.5 acres, that's not really infill, because there's ample opportunity to grow and develop. What this ordinance would do is we wouldn't have any presumption like that. We would go through the normal process and say, okay, if you really, really want to develop, then you can develop, but show us where the roads are, show us how it would have developed or could have developed as a whole, as an integrated part of the larger long-term development. And we would go, and that's something, as I said in the work meeting, we try to do anyways. That's something that we're trying to be formal. I think the biggest difference is that ordinance now would require a developer to come in and show in some circumstances how that street system could integrate with the larger development. In this one, there's probably not much that can be done. What you see is probably what will be there. But in the future, there may be some smaller parcels that come in and they'll go forward, and this time they'll be required to graphically represent that analysis that we're currently doing. I hope that answered the question, because it was a pretty long explanation.
That was a good explanation. In work session, you mentioned that this ordinance, it doesn't help or hinder necessarily what you do, because you, in planning, you do this anyway.
Yes, we're doing this anyways. I think the big difference is what we haven't required, which would now be a requirement, would be a concept plan. And typically in the past, that hasn't been a requirement. But as things come along, and you need to remember, just because you have a concept plan now that shows how it could be feasible, in the future, we need to be careful about getting too married to a concept plan. Because as the next property owner comes in, if they want to change it and things, they certainly, if they have the zoning, can do that, and we would still work with them and try and make the projects work. That's why a conceptual plan, while it can be of some value, may not be of, especially the bigger the property, that important of a document to have, because you can really change around roads. What we do is, if there's a very important major or local road that we really think needs to be there, we'll go as staff and initiate it and put it on the major and local street plan.
All right, thank you.
Saw a good example of that in the just previous item, in fact. So
Yes, on the vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yes.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Sewell?
This has been an interesting one for me. It's one of those where I've kind of been going back and forth in my mind, and wasn't sure what the right thing to do was, and kind of trying to understand the whole issue. And then we talked about it for an hour and a half today, and I guess according to Mr. McGinn, it's probably not going to make that much difference either way in terms of changing how the process works. But I did get the impression that maybe there are some advantages with this proposed ordinance in terms of clarity and in terms of the requiring this concept plan. And it sounds like maybe even in a situation where you have a development that's larger than 3 acres, they would still have to do this, and there may be some situations where that would be helpful as well, maybe even in the case of the property that was the Reese development that was just mentioned. So I could really go either way on this. I understand the concern about, is this, this is a citywide change, is there something we're overlooking, is this going to open something up? And I'm also if something is not going to make that much difference in current practice, then there's also the question of why would we make a change. But on the whole, as I weigh the two, I feel like there might be an advantage to going ahead with this.
Thank you. I invite a motion approving the ordinance amendment.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Winterton. A second?
Can I ask for a recess, since it was just given to us, the completed or revised copy? Could we just have a recess to read it over fully? Is that okay?
Certainly. When would you prefer to have the recess, now or later?
Yeah, just a 5-minute recess before we vote on it.
Fine.
Thank you.
We have not exhausted our 5 minutes.
Oh, and I can go back to sleep. No, I shouldn't say that.
Is there any further discussion before we move to the vote?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a second to the motion made by Mr. Winterton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. Mr. Garrett has seconded the motion made by Mr. Winterton.
And as I thought about this during our 5-minute break here, is I don't see a lot of change in what we're doing, other than I'm hopeful that it will actually require developers to think more to the future of our city and where they're going to develop and what direction they're going to be going, how we can integrate it. It doesn't matter how big the piece is. They need to look to the future and to see what we're going to do. And I appreciate your comments on that, and as we talked about it, and I think that that's what this is intended to do.
Is there any further discussion?
I still have the concern that if the current ordinance isn't broken per se, what exactly are we fixing? I guess we are fixing that you can do smaller plots of land, but are we then opening a door for something unintended? And I wonder if there are other options for helping situations like Mr. Chappell's to proceed without changing our whole citywide ordinance. Mr. McGinn, are there any other options available for Mr. Chappell? I'm hung up on, I don't feel comfortable changing a citywide ordinance for one situation. I feel a lot more comfortable about it if I knew that this was going to really improve what you do. It doesn't seem like it improves what you do. You're already doing these things, and so I'm kind of stuck there. If you could help explain if there are other options, if there's a way to address the single issue here differently and not change the ordinance.
Well, let me address the overall ordinance and the citywide impact. I don't think there's always unintended consequences, but frankly, with the ordinance that's in front of you today, nothing causes me great concern. We're complete, as I mentioned before, we're completely comfortable with this proposed ordinance that council staff has worked on. We have no problem going forward with that. Again, will it be this great benefit and provide all these? I don't know. I think we're already doing it. I really think what it is a codification of what we're already doing. And that's not a bad thing, to have a codification of what you're already doing, then people know. I think outside of this, for Mr. Chappell, if he had his property were zoned right now R18, I can tell you the reality of what would have happened already is if he had the R18 zone, he would have come in with that plan in front of you. Since it's under 3 acres under the Planning Commission bylaws, it would be delegated to staff to act in place of the Planning Commission, given approval. We would have given an approval as staff and would have done it. Since a rezone is needed, the preliminary subdivision plan comes with it. And I think, and you'll have to ask Mr. Chappell, I think what he's concerned about is the Planning Commission, again, saying, no, we don't think this is infill. And as staff, we've recommended Planning Commission that we think it is infill because of, we are where we are with the property, and we think it's infill and go forward. So if the council approved or rezoned the property R18, and the preliminary subdivision came to just staff and community development, we would approve it. But our process is set up such that it's required that a preliminary subdivision comes, and we always give that to the Planning Commission. So if there's a rezone that's initiated by the council or by community development, and typically when the council does one or community development brings in a request for a rezone, and that's happened, as you know, on 4800 North, University Avenue, the city-owned properties there have been another city-owned property. We do make an exception. We go forward and rezone those properties without a preliminary subdivision plan coming in. However, as I mentioned to you before, I would not be, my guess is when the rezone goes to the Planning Commission, there's going to be some significant opposition from the neighborhood about a rezone on this, that it shouldn't be rezoned. Well, and if it is rezoned, that it ought to be rezoned R110, not R18. And so the policy question that the council has to rezone the property is going to drive, ultimately, whatever happens there will be the real deciding issue.
So, and if we don't approve this, you don't feel like he can move forward?
I'm sorry?
If we don't approve this resolution, you don't feel like he could move, I guess I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Do you feel like he could move forward if we didn't approve this ordinance tonight?
Yeah, if he didn't approve this ordinance tonight, or if the council didn't approve this ordinance tonight, I think he can still go forward. He can go forward with his rezone and his project plan. And if past actions, unless things have changed, there's a high likelihood that the Planning Commission may say, my best guess is right now today that the Planning Commission would probably recommend no on the zone change and say the subdivision is not infill.
So by
And so I think clearly the applicant's application on this issue to reduce the acreage, the 3-acre requirement, was an attempt to get around that issue with the Planning Commission. Because if it were, the ordinance suddenly said 2 acres and above is fine, then it would be a subdivision, and the only issue would be the rezone. And I know in the past the neighborhood has opposed rezone of this property into residential. And from what I've heard in this process, that's my guess is likely that, and again, when I say the neighborhood, it's not one monolithic block, but a significant and vocal group from the neighborhood would oppose it. Now, as I said earlier, I don't know off the top of my head any communities. I was asking earlier, Mr. Maxfield and Mr. Pepperoni said, okay, in all the different cities you have worked, have you ever seen a city that has an ordinance like ours with this minimum acreage requirement on the subdivision issue? And the answer was no, don't know of one. Why that's in there and the exact reasoning, I don't know for sure. That kind of predates us, and it's an ordinance that we deal with. But whether it's there or not, we would still go through the same process that we go through, because just under common law and dealing with property, you have to allow reasonable access. You can't landlock people. We look at roads and street systems to see if there's a reasonable opportunity for a developer to come forward. And it's not infrequent that one property owner at one time doesn't want to go forward at the same time other property owners are going forward. And so the development pattern gets set, and then when it comes time for them, the one property owner who didn't go forward, sometimes they can't maximize the number of lots, or it's a little more expensive in some way because they have to build in a manner that is constrained by what happened before. And so that's why we're always encouraging people to get together. If one property owner is going to go forward, the remaining property owners ought to get together and seriously consider whether it's in their best interest to move forward or not, because things like that can happen. As you can see from the plat, it would have been wonderful if this property owner and the owners of the Reese Estates had gotten together back at that time. We wouldn't even be having this discussion, and there would be a better development for the city and for the individual property owners.
Thank you. I think that the fact that city staff did talk with Mr. Chappell back when he built his home and did offer other options for better connectivity, and he chose to build his home there. I have a hard time changing our city ordinance to allow him to move forward because it's one situation. It's you made a decision however many years ago to put your home there knowing that it could interfere with the ultimate development, or at least that's what city staff apparently recommended, something different. And I don't feel like a case has been made for changing a city ordinance to allow this development to move forward where it has citywide impact and maybe some unintended impacts that we're not aware of. But
Mr. Van Buren.
I'd just like to clarify one comment that was just made. We're making an assumption that of a conversation that went on years ago about proposed roads with adjacent property owners that would make this a better subdivision. Whether it would, we have not heard the arguments that what the cost to this developer may have incurred to allow those other properties to take part in this. We haven't been participants in that argument to know if the proposed development at that time had negative impacts on this developer and positive to the other. So I don't think we can make a judgment here saying because you didn't accept the suggestion of the community development at the time that now you need to be punished, or I think that's a long stretch to make that argument. I think whatever went on then went on, but until we really go back and look at notes and I think that would be that'd be dangerous to make our opinion on supposedly a conversation that went on 7 years ago.
I don't really look at it as punishment. I look at it as a decision that was made with knowledge from city staff saying this is what would really make this area develop well. And he had the right to build his home where he did, and he was within his rights. And I'm not saying that I feel this way to punish him or anyone. I just feel like changing a city ordinance should benefit all of the residents of Provo, that it should be in the best interest of all of the residents of Provo. And if it's in the best interest to allow small parcels to develop, then I would be all for this. But I didn't hear compelling reasons to allow smaller parcels to be developed without going through a process, without coming before the Planning Commission, without having some process. So that process anyway. And that's more where I'm coming from. This is not punishment. In fact, I mentioned in work session and here as well, I would love for him to have an option, and it sounds like he does have an option to proceed. I just don't know that this is the best option to proceed, but that's my opinion, and that's where I'm coming from.
Mr. Sewell? Mr. Sewell.
Mr. Chairman, one thing that's helped me as I've struggled to try to decide how to vote on this is I think we should consider this as a vote solely on whether this amendment is best for the whole city and not have anything to do with this particular development. I think we'll have a separate vote on whether that is appropriate when the zone change comes. That's
Mr. Chappell, when we went to the motion and the seconding, we effectively ended public comment. Further comment? All in favor of the motion? All opposed? In favor of the motion, Mr. Van Buren, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Winterton, Mr. Sewell, Mr. Hales, and Mr. Miller. Opposed, Ms. Santiago. Thank you. At a recent work meeting of the council, the administration, at the recommendation of its sustainability committee, proposed to the council that there be a joint resolution urging the state legislature to carefully study the merits of Tier 3 gasoline and its potential distribution in the state of Utah with the attendant implications for Provo City. We invited at that time a draft of the resolution, which was forthcoming. And in our work meeting today, we discussed that draft and found reasons to prefer its revision as opposed to letting it stand as a joint resolution, largely because there were claims made, or there were, shall we say, planks of that particular resolution that rested on data that we had reason to question. So from that discussion came the recommendation that we move this item to our meeting, our next meeting, which will be on the 16th of September. In the meantime, inviting the council staff and administration to revise the joint resolution accordingly. It should strongly emphasize our interest as a municipal council and as the administration, I presume, on behalf of the citizens of Provo, to study as carefully as possible, given the resources of the legislature, the merits of availability of Tier 3 gasoline throughout the state, as well as the as its relative merits. That is to say, it may very well be potentially more usable by some vehicle owners than by others. And we hope that the information that would advise citizens about the relative merits of Tier 3 gasoline would be a consequence of the legislature's research. I invite further comments. Mr. Hales.
I agree completely with what you've said, and as a result, make a motion that we postpone this discussion until we have a chance to review that resolution.
Ideally on the 16th.
On the 16th.
Fine. Thank you very much for the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Santiago, thank you. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Garrett, a joint resolution declaring the intent of Provo City to rely on the state's political subdivision's Ethics Review Commission to handle ethics complaints against Provo City officers and employees.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier this year, under the direction of our council chair, our city council formed a commission, a council governance committee with membership of council member David Sewell and myself and city staff, and also the counsel of city attorney Brian Jones. And one issue that we were asked to look at is the process by which ethics complaints against Provo City officers and employees could be reviewed and handled. And this came to light particularly because of an interlocal agreement that Orem City was reviewing and had brought to our attention, that an agreement that has been 4 other cities in Utah County have agreed to be part of: Payson, Pleasant Grove, Springville, and Spanish Fork, and that Orem City was also in the process of joining. So our governance committee reviewed options that we have relative to this, which include referring to a statewide ethics commission that was established by Utah legislation in 2012, allowing a state commission, ethics commission, to review complaints. They also allowed cities to make their own decisions, to establish their own process or have an ethics commission within the city, or to form, as is the case in Utah County, an interlocal commission. Our committee, after reviewing this, felt that the best course of action for us would be to rely on, as is the proposed joint resolution before us, to rely on the state's Ethics Review Commission to handle all complaints that might be brought against Provo City officials or employees. And so that's our recommendation today, is that we consider this joint resolution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. I note that this is a joint resolution and therefore invite Mayor Curtis to comment.
Thank you. I appreciate the committee that spent a considerable amount of time looking into this and various options. Unfortunately, I've had more experience with this than I would like, and that experience convinces me that this is a good option for us. And quite frankly, I'm very pleased that we have this as a resource. As a city, we've not always had this resource to help us resolve some of these issues. And I believe it's very important for us to have that, and look forward to approving this with the council.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there comments or questions regarding the matter? Ms. Santiago?
I too just want to thank Mr. Sewell, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Jones, all those who were involved in studying this out and coming to the council with a great proposal. And I feel confident in what you brought forward, and appreciate the state's efforts to compile this committee. And I think it's very varied, and it's a good committee. The makeup of the committee I really appreciate, and their training, and the fact that they'll probably be more engaged. Well, you know, depending, because they're statewide, they may have more cases and more opportunities to engage, but appreciate your efforts on this.
Might that be a motion, Ms. Santiago?
That is a motion to accept this resolution declaring the intent of Provo City to rely on the state's Political Subdivisions Ethics Review Commission to handle ethics complaints against Provo City officers and employees.
Thank you. Second, please. Mr. Hales, thank you. All in favor? The motion passes unanimously in the affirmative.
He doesn't technically need to vote. He signals his approval by signing it afterwards, but it's certainly acceptable for him to indicate his assent here.
In favor, thank you.
So the vote was 7-0 officially in the affirmative, with Mayor Curtis displaying his strong affirmation. Now a motion to adjourn this council meeting. Mr. Garrett, thank you. A second. Mr. Sewell, thank you. All in favor? That motion is approved unanimously. Thank you all very much.
I would, Mr. Chairman, yes, we're going to award a Provo Rocks T-shirt to everybody in the audience.